Now they can all just deny and bury their heads in the sand and pretend they didn't know any better and that they were relying on, experts like Theresa Tam and Dina Hinshaw, who were in fact ignoring the pharmaceutical company's own data and ignoring, even the written words of the contract which were the vaccines were not safe and effective, to engage in this mass marketing campaign coupled with the coercive power of the state to force people to get vaccinated with shots that were neither safe or effective.
Alberta-based law firm Rath & Co. has launched a class action lawsuit against the federal and Alberta provincial governments on behalf of Albertans harmed by COVID-19 vaccines. As described by the firm, the case alleges unlawful, negligent, inadequate, improper, unfair, and deceptive practices by the defendants in relation to the warning, marketing, promotion, and distribution of the COVID vaccines. The case centers around the proposed class action representative, Carrie Sakamoto, a young mother from Lethbridge, Alberta, whose personal vaccine injury $10.5 million lawsuit pivoted to expand into this class action suit on behalf of all vaccine-injured Albertans. Sakamoto will be joined by hundreds, if not thousands, of plaintiffs in similar situations, suffering the debilitating effects of the hailed, safe and effective, novel, modified RNA COVID-19 injections. Lawyers Jeffrey Rath and Eva Chipiuk from Rath & Co. join me now to discuss the government's misrepresentations that they are alleging in this case. Check it out.
It's shocking to me the last time we were in court, and I think this is why it's important. Both the Alberta government and the government of Canada asserted in open court that they had no duty of care to the citizens of Canada or the citizens of Alberta for these vaccine products that they were stuffing down everybody's throats. So that's why I think that this is so important. I mean, the government, basically stripped people of their human rights and their civil rights, told us we couldn't go on airplanes, told the unvaccinated that they couldn't go to restaurants, couldn't go here, couldn't go there, restricted business operations to keep unvaccinated people out of businesses, knowing full well that the vaccines didn't stop transmission and didn't stop anybody from getting sick. So I think that's why it's important, because the government knew that these vaccines were harmful, knew that they weren't doing anything that, achieving any of the objectives that they thought they were going to achieve. But at the same time, we're forcing people to take these vaccines while now standing up and saying, oh, yeah, but you can't sue us because we didn't owe anybody a duty of care in doing this. So I think that's shocking, and I think the public needs to be aware of that. Well, we think potentially it's going to have a huge set a huge precedent, because one of the things that we've specifically pled is a conspiracy on the part of the government of Canada and the government of Alberta, but specifically Theresa Tam and Dina Hinshaw and this whole committee of chief medical officers of health to fool people into taking these vaccines under the slogan that they were quote unquote safe and effective. So they weren't concerned about giving people the appropriate advice with regard to the vaccines. They weren't concerned with regard to having people make informed decisions from the standpoint of informed consent to getting the shots. They were only concerned with coercing people into getting the shots and then keeping them from learning the truth about the shots so that they could continue, this so-called vaccine rollouts. I think all of the people that were involved, all these chief medical officers of health, Justin Trudeau, Jason Kenney, all of those people, they need to be held accountable. And, that's one of the things that this lawsuit seeks to do, because by taking away people's ability to get informed consent, we're alleging that they actually engaged in a conspiracy to commit assault. So our position is where people were kept with the real information and the real truth about these vaccines was kept from people. Every shot that went into somebody's arm under the slogan safe and effective, from my perspective, was an assault. And, and in the cases of Carrie Sakamoto and others who have been horribly injured, it was an assault causing bodily harm.
Rath explains that the case is focusing on the government's deliberate withholding of information and conspiring to prevent the public from receiving full details about the vaccines before they were mandated. Rath emphasizes that the argument challenges the assumption that the vaccines were safe and effective, and the full scope of a trial would aim to, in fact, prove otherwise, despite other courts taking judicial notice of the safe and effective marketing slogan.
The court took judicial notice because that's what the public health authorities were telling the general public. So that's what judges were hearing as experts in that field, public health officials. What's really interesting and what we're bringing forward in this case is that the manufacturing companies themselves, like Pfizer, we have the redacted version of the contract. They themselves don't state that either the vaccines are safe or effective. And so if we're going to take judicial notice, let's take judicial notice of what the pharmaceutical companies actually said, not what was represented post that agreement being signed by public health officials that weren't the ones, that were manufacturing the drug or vaccine, whatever we want to call it. But I think that's an important piece of distinguishing when it was used as judicial notice and then how we are bringing this claim forward.
So one of the other aspects of this claim as well is that we'll be getting into the whole issue of the governments themselves, not just ignoring the contractual information, but ignoring actual scientific data that was gathered by the companies during the testing phases of these products, right? So as an example, Pfizer, that's called Table 14 of the Pfizer emergency use authorization, it clearly demonstrated that if you put these shots into the arms of children, that the vaccines themselves were going to kill more children than COVID. And I mean, that was demonstrated, that was Pfizer's own data. And the government of Canada and Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney completely ignored this data, even though it was brought to their attention by our office, by letter, prior to the rollout of the childhood vaccines. So they had information knowing that these shots were going to kill more kids than COVID, but they rolled them out anyway and continually lied to parents about these shots that are being so-called safe and effective. So now we have all these parents across Canada with dead children. Nobody wants to take responsibility for it, even though Tam and Trudeau and Kenney and Hinshaw were all warned in writing prior to the rollout of these, childhood vaccines that Pfizer's own data indicated that they were going to kill more kids than COVID. At this stage, you're simply seen as allegations. Once a judge says, well, those allegations are true, it puts a whole different spin on all of this from the standpoint of being able to hold governments accountable. Right now, they can all just deny and bury their heads in the sand and pretend they didn't know any better and that they were relying on, experts like Theresa Tam and Dina Hinshaw, who were in fact ignoring the pharmaceutical company's own data and ignoring, even the written words of the contract which were the vaccines were not safe and effective, to engage in this mass marketing campaign coupled with the coercive power of the state to force people to get vaccinated with shots that were neither safe or effective.
The case will be in court tomorrow for a case management hearing, which is the first court appearance following the filing of the originating application, where the judge, parties, and their lawyers identify the key issues in dispute and discuss potential ways to resolve them. But Rath calls this a delay tactic and abusive process.
And what the governments are trying to do is to delay through what we say is an abusive process, the certification hearing, by claiming that they should be allowed to have a quote-unquote motion to strike our pleadings prior to certification. And of course, we'll be talking to the court tomorrow about case law that indicates that this is an abusive process, that the government is simply trying to delay inappropriately the certification hearing, because the whole issue of is there a valid cause of action is the first step of the certification hearing. So all the case law that we've reviewed indicates that a motion to strike is highly inappropriate. It isn't in itself an abusive process. But again, having litigated with governments for 31 years, this doesn't surprise me. This is, government lawyer playbook 101, which is delay. And then page 2 is delay, page 3 is delay, page 4 is delay, etc. And that's what we're dealing with here is, simply from our perspective, an attempt at delaying these proceedings, and what the case law to us indicates constitutes a clear abusive process.
The stunning inability of the government to acknowledge the severity of the COVID vaccine injury situation, leaving those injured by these vaccines without proper support, as detailed by my reporting on the novel injection-borne federally implemented vaccine injury support program known as VISP, makes it clear that legal remedy needs to be brought forward to hold officials accountable and to address the significant harm done, while setting a strong precedent for future public health responses and plans. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. We've launched a special campaign at nomoreshots.ca where you can call on Federal Minister of Health Mark Holland to revoke market authorization for these injections. You can also sign our petition calling for the same. Check it out at nomoreshots.ca and support our work by signing our petition and sending that form email to the Federal Minister telling him no more shots. That's nomoreshots.ca.